The Last Stand. The crimson sky of Zenthar Prime crackled with energy as another section of the capital city disappeared beneath writhing metal tentacles. Ambassador Kylara pressed her six-fingered hands against the communication console, her usually pristine white fur now stained with ash and desperation. The elegant spires that had stood for 10,000 years were being consumed by creatures that defied every law of nature, her people understood. "This is Ambassador Kylara of the Zenthari Confederation," she broadcast across all galactic frequencies, her melodic voice breaking with exhaustion. "We are under attack by an unknown enemy. Our defensive fleets have been destroyed. Our planetary shields have failed. If anyone can hear this transmission, we need immediate assistance. Repeat, this is a priority alpha emergency. Zenthar Prime is falling." Through the transparent walls of the communications tower, she watched as the Void Swarm continued their relentless advance. The creatures were unlike anything in the galactic databases, part organic, part machine, constantly shifting and adapting. They moved like liquid shadow across the landscape, absorbing everything they touched. Energy weapons simply made them stronger. Kinetic rounds were dissolved before impact. Even their most advanced quantum disruptors had only slowed the invasion by hours. "Ambassador," called Communications Officer Zeph from across the chamber, his usually steady voice trembling. "We have responses coming in from across the sector." Kylara's heart lifted for the first time in days. The Galactic Defense Network had protocols for exactly this type of situation. Surely the combined might of a dozen advanced civilizations could stop these abominations. "Put them through," she ordered, straightening her diplomatic robes despite the chaos around them. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a series of alien faces, representatives from the most powerful worlds in their region of space. Admiral Thex of the Crystalline Empire spoke first, his translucent features rigid with regret. "Ambassador Kylara, the Crystalline Empire deeply sympathizes with your situation. However, our quantum analysis indicates that these entities pose a significant threat to our own dimensional stability. We cannot risk exposure." One by one, the other responses came in. The hive mind of Androxa was too busy with internal restructuring. The Void Merchants Guild considered the risk too great for their trade routes. The Ancient Watchers claimed they needed more time to study the threat before acting. Each refusal hit Kylara like a physical blow. These were her friends, her allies, civilizations that had sworn mutual aid pacts with the Zenthari thousands of years ago. Now, when extinction stared her people in the face, they abandoned them to preserve their own safety. "There must be someone," she whispered to herself, scrolling through the list of civilizations that had received her broadcast. Her eyes stopped on an entry she didn't recognize. A small blue-green world in an outer spiral arm, barely registered in the galactic census. "Earth," she read aloud. "Zeph, what do we know about this world?" The young officer's fingers danced across his interface, pulling up the sparse file. "It's unusual, Ambassador. The planetary classification is listed as Deathworld, uninhabitable. The survey team that discovered it 3 cycles ago recommended quarantine status. Why would we receive a response from an uninhabitable world? According to the records, there are indigenous life forms, primitive, but they somehow survived. On the surface, the scientific team was disturbed by what they found. They listed the native species as aggressively adaptive and recommended no further contact." Kylara stared at the file. A death world inhabited by creatures too primitive for proper classification. What could such beings possibly offer against the technological horror consuming her homeworld? Still, they were the only ones who had bothered to respond. "Put them through," she decided. The hologram flickered, showing a strange rectangular chamber filled with blinking lights and crude-looking displays. A being sat in what appeared to be a primitive command chair, bipedal, with forward-facing eyes and a flat, mobile mouth. Its skin was pink-brown, covered partially by artificial materials in blue and gold. Most disturbing of all, when it spoke, it showed rows of sharp white teeth. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth ship Defiance," the creature said, and a harsh guttural language that the universal translator struggled to process. "We received your distress call, Ambassador. What's your situation?" Kylara found herself momentarily speechless. The creature's eyes, those predator eyes, seemed to look right through her, calculating and measuring in a way that made her fur stand on end. These were not the gentle, large eyes of prey species or the compound eyes of hive minds. These were hunter's eyes. We are under attack," she managed. "Our defensive capabilities have been overwhelmed. We have lost contact with our colonies and defensive fleets. The enemy is unlike anything we have encountered." "Understood," Captain Chen replied without hesitation. "We're mobilizing our available fleet now. What kind of enemy are we dealing with?" "You don't understand," Kylara said, leaning forward. "These entities have destroyed the combined fleets of the Zenthari Confederation. Our technology is among the most advanced in this sector. They adapt to every weapon we use, absorb our energy systems, and grow stronger with each victory. Even the Crystalline Empire refuses to engage them." Something flickered in the human's expression. Not fear, but what looked almost like interest. "Adaptive biomechanical entities that consume technology and grow stronger from energy weapons. Got it. How long do you have?" "Perhaps 12 hours before they reach the last civilian evacuation sites. Captain, with respect, if our most advanced warships could not stop them, what can your people possibly do? Our sensors indicate your technology is primitive." For the first time since the transmission began, the human showed its teeth in what Kylara's translation software labeled as a smile. The expression was deeply unsettling. "Ambassador, let me ask you something. What kind of world do your people come from?" The question seemed absurd given the circumstances, but Kylara answered anyway. "Zenthar Prime is a paradise world. Perfect atmosphere, stable weather, abundant resources, no natural predators. We have cultivated it for millennia to support our civilization." "Sounds nice," Captain Chen said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Earth is different. Our atmosphere is corrosive. Our weather systems can level cities. Our oceans are filled with creatures that hunt in packs, and our continents are covered with predators that can kill with single bites. We have diseases that can wipe out populations, natural disasters that reshape landscapes, and radiation levels that would sterilize most inhabited worlds." Kylara's throat tightened. "That sounds horrible." "It made us strong," the human replied simply. "Ambassador, you're asking what primitive technology can do against an adaptive enemy. But you're thinking about this wrong. Our strength isn't our technology, it's us. We didn't conquer Earth by being the smartest or the strongest. We conquered it by being the most stubborn, adaptable, and relentlessly creative species on the planet." Behind Captain Chen, other humans moved through, their primitive command center with coordinated efficiency. Their movements reminded Kylara of the pack hunters she had seen in nature documentaries, each individual aware of the others, working together with an instinctive precision that seemed almost telepathic. "Captain," Kylara said carefully, "I appreciate your willingness to help, but these creatures have consumed entire worlds. They've destroyed fleets numbering in the thousands. How many ships are you bringing?" 57 vessels, Chen replied. 57? Kylara's voice cracked. The Crystalline Empire lost over 3,000 ships in their last engagement with the Swarm. The Crystalline Empire thinks like every other advanced civilization. They rely on superior technology and overwhelming firepower. When that fails, they retreat and try to find better technology. We're not going to do that. Then what are you going to do? Captain Chen's smile became something that Kylara would remember in her nightmares for years to come. We're going to do what humans do best, Ambassador. We're going to survive, adapt, and win. Because that's what evolution trained us for. The transmission ended, leaving Kylara staring at empty air. Around her, the communications center continued its desperate work, coordinating evacuation efforts and monitoring the swarm's advance. But her mind was fixed on those predator eyes and that terrifying smile. Ambassador, Zeph called from his station. Long-range sensors are detecting new contacts entering the system. 57 vessels, configuration unknown. Through the tower's windows, Kylara could see the first human ships entering Xenthar Prime's atmosphere. They were crude, angular things made of metal and ceramic, with no elegant curves or bioluminescent beauty. They looked like weapons, brutal, efficient, and utterly without mercy. As the human fleet descended toward her dying world, Kylara wondered if she had just invited salvation or simply traded one nightmare for another. The Void Swarm had been consuming worlds for months, growing stronger with each victory. But they had never encountered anything like humanity. The last transmission from Earth Command had been brief and direct. Deathworlders inbound. Maintain defensive positions and prepare for unconventional warfare tactics. Looking at the approaching human vessels, Kylara finally understood what the survey team had meant when they classified humanity as aggressively adaptive. These weren't just primitive beings who had survived on a hostile world. These were apex, predators who had turned survival into an art form. The Void Swarm was about to learn why sometimes the prey fights back. When Deathworlders hunt, the human fleet had been in orbit around Xenthar Prime for exactly 17 minutes when everything changed. Ambassador Kylara watched from the emergency command center as Captain Chen's ships took positions that defied every principle of space combat doctrine. Instead of forming defensive formations or preparing orbital bombardment patterns, the human vessels scattered across the system like seeds on wind. Some dove toward the planet's surface, others positioned themselves near the asteroid fields, and several actually flew directly into the path of the advancing Void Swarm.
Captain Chen, Kylara broadcast urgently, your ships are moving into direct contact with the enemy. Our experience suggests that close engagement allows them to adapt more quickly to your weapons. The human's response came back immediately.
Her voice calm despite the chaos erupting around her ship. Understood, Ambassador. We're not planning to use weapons they can adapt to. On the tactical display, the first human vessel encountered a swarm cluster, a writhing mass of biomechanical tentacles and adaptive armor that had shrugged off the Xenthari's most powerful quantum weapons. Kylara expected to watch another ship disappear into the enemy's consumption matrix. Instead, the human ship did something unprecedented. It rammed directly into the swarm cluster at full speed. The collision sent shockwaves through both fleets. The swarm cluster, which had been a coordinated mass of thousands of entities, suddenly broke apart in confusion. Individual creatures tumbled through space, their formation destroyed by the sheer kinetic impact. Direct collision course? Kylara gasped. That's suicide. No, came another voice from the human fleet. That's Tuesday. This is Lieutenant Commander Jackson of the UES Relentless. The Defiance is fine. We build our ships to take impacts like that. Indeed, the Defiance emerged from the collision with its hull scarred but intact. More importantly, the swarm cluster was in disarray, its individual entities trying to reform their collective pattern. That's when the second part of the human strategy became clear. While the larger ships engaged in ramming attacks, smaller human craft, things barely larger than fighter jets, swarmed through the confused swarm entities. But these weren't firing energy weapons or kinetic rounds. They were dropping objects. What are your small craft deploying? Kylara asked. Mines, Captain, Chen replied matter-of-factly. Chemical explosives with proximity triggers. Simple, effective, and completely analog. No energy signatures for them to adapt to, no quantum patterns to absorb. Just old-fashioned chemical reactions. The first mine detonated among a group of swarm entities, and the effect was immediate. Instead of the clean energy absorption that had neutralized Xenthari weapons, the explosion tore through biomechanical armor like paper. Chunks of alien matter scattered across space, leaking strange fluids that immediately began to crystallize in the vacuum. Impossible, breathed Officer Zeph from his monitoring station. Their adaptive armor should be able to compensate for chemical explosives within minutes. Only if they've encountered them before, Chen replied. The swarm adapts by analyzing energy patterns and technological signatures. Chemical explosives are just controlled combustion. No exotic energy, no complex technology. They're the same basic reaction that's been occurring in the universe since the first organic compounds met oxygen. More explosions bloomed across the battlefield as human minds found their targets. The swarm's formation began to collapse as entities tried to adapt to threats they had no framework for understanding. Their biomechanical nature, so perfectly designed to counter advanced technology, was useless against weapons that barely qualified as technology at all. But the humans weren't finished. As the swarm entities regrouped and began adapting to the chemical explosives, human ships began the next phase of their attack. Instead of maintaining distance and firing from safe positions, they moved in close, dangerously close. "What are they doing now?" Kylara asked, watching as human vessels positioned themselves within grabbing distance of swarm tentacles. "Boarding actions," came the reply from Lieutenant Commander Jackson. "We're sending Marine units directly onto the swarm entities." "Boarding?" Kylara's voice rose to a squeak. "These creatures dissolve any technology they touch. Your people will be consumed instantly." "Only if we give them technology to consume," Jackson replied. The tactical display showed tiny figures in primitive spacesuits launching from airlocks and magnetic clamping onto swarm entities. "Marine units, you are weapons-free for close-quarters combat. Remember, these things adapt to energy weapons and advanced materials. Stick to basics." Kylara watched in horrified fascination as human soldiers moved across the surface of swarm entities like antibodies attacking a virus. Instead of energy weapons, they carried simple metal implements, knives, axes, and what appeared to be sharpened steel rods. The first human marine to encounter a swarm defender, a creature roughly the size of a small vehicle with bladed appendages, did something that would be discussed in xenobiology courses for generations. When the creature struck with its biomechanical claws, the human caught the blow on a simple metal shield, then responded with a steel blade thrust directly into what appeared to be a critical joint. The swarm entity convulsed and died. "How?" Kylara whispered. "Carbon-based life forms are still carbon-based," replied another human voice, this one from Sergeant Martinez of the 3rd Marine Battalion. "Their armor adapts to energy weapons and high-tech materials, but it's still organic. Sharp metal applied with sufficient force to critical areas produces predictable results." Across the battlefield, human Marines were systematically dismantling swarm entities with tools that belonged in a museum. They moved with practiced efficiency, identifying weak points, exploiting gaps in biomechanical armor, and using their environment as a weapon. "Sergeant Martinez," came Captain Chen's voice over the communications. "What's your assessment of enemy combat capability?" "They're individually powerful but tactically inflexible, Captain. They're used to enemies that maintain distance and rely on technology. They don't know how to handle opponents who get in close and use primitive weapons. It's like they've never encountered persistence hunters before." "Persistence hunters?" Kylara asked. "Predators that win through endurance and adaptability rather than speed or strength," Chen explained. "On Earth, humans were persistence hunters. We couldn't outrun our prey, couldn't overpower large animals, but we could outlast them. We could track them for days, adapt our tactics to their behavior, and eventually wear them down through sheer stubborn determination." The battle was beginning to turn. Swarm entities that had seemed invincible hours earlier were falling back, their adaptive systems overwhelmed by the variety of primitive attacks. Chemical explosives, kinetic ramming, melee weapons, and boarding actions presented too many different variables for their biomechanical minds to process effectively. "Contact! Contact!" came an urgent transmission from one of the human Marines. "We've got movement inside this thing. It's not just armor. There are control centers, some kind of neural networks running through the entire structure." "Excellent," Captain Chen replied. "Demo teams, prepare to breach the central nervous systems. Use standard demolitions, nothing fancy." "Demolitions?" Kylara asked weakly. "More chemical explosives," Chen explained. "If these creatures have centralized nervous systems, then disrupting those systems should cause cascading failures throughout their collective network." Human demolition teams, looking absurdly primitive, in their basic spacesuits and carrying what appeared to be simple chemical charges, began infiltrating the largest swarm entities. They moved through biomechanical corridors with the confidence of soldiers who had trained in urban warfare environments. "Charges placed," reported Demolition Team Alpha. 30 seconds to detonation. "All units, clear the blast radius," ordered Captain Chen. The explosion, when it came, was spectacular. The largest swarm entity, a creature nearly the size of a small moon, convulsed as chemical explosives tore through its internal neural networks. The destruction cascaded through connected entities, causing a chain reaction of system failures that spread across the entire swarm formation. Within minutes, the entities that had been consuming worlds were floating in space like dead tissue, their adaptive armor inert, their biomechanical systems shut down. The silence that followed was profound. "Status report," Captain Chen requested. "All swarm entities in this system are neutralized," reported Lieutenant Commander Jackson. "No human casualties. Minor damage to 3 vessels from ramming actions, but all ships remain combat effective." Ambassador Kylara stared at the tactical display, unable to process what she had witnessed. An enemy that had destroyed the combined fleets of multiple advanced civilizations had been eliminated in less than 2 hours by beings using primitive weapons and simple tactics. "Captain Chen," she said finally, "how is this possible? These creatures destroyed fleets with technology thousands of years ahead of yours." "That was their weakness," Chen replied. "They were perfectly adapted to fight advanced civilizations that rely on energy weapons, quantum technology, and complex systems, but they had never encountered a species that still remembered how to fight with knives and chemical explosives." "But you do have advanced technology," Kylara protested. "Your ships, your communications, your space travel capabilities." "We have those things," Chen agreed. "But we also remember what it was like before we had them. On Earth, survival meant being able to fight with whatever tools were available. Sticks, stones, sharp metal, controlled fire. These were our weapons for hundreds of thousands of years before we developed energy weapons. We never forgot how to use them." As human ships began forming up for departure, Kylara realized that her people's classification of Earth as a death world had been catastrophically inadequate. Earth hadn't produced primitive beings who had somehow survived on a hostile planet. Earth had produced apex predators who had conquered a hostile planet and then turned their attention to the stars. "Ambassador," Captain Chen said as the human fleet prepared to leave, "your people are safe. The immediate threat has been neutralized, but you should know. This swarm was just one cluster. Our intelligence suggests there are others out there growing stronger, consuming more worlds." "What do you suggest?" Kylara asked. "Form an alliance with Earth," Chen replied without hesitation. "The galaxy is full of advanced civilizations that have forgotten how to fight. When the next threat emerges, and there will be a next threat, you're going to need allies who remember that sometimes the best response to advanced weapons is a sharp stick applied with creativity and determination." As the human fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving Xanthar Prime's orbit clear for the first time in weeks, Kylara began drafting a new message to the Galactic Council. The classification of Earth as an uninhabitable death world would need to be changed. The new classification would read, "Allied Death World, approach with caution and respect." Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage, and the universe would never be the same.